He believed that once the house went quiet, everyone inside it was finally safe. The doors were locked. The lights were low. Nothing unexpected was supposed to happen after midnight. But that night, as he passed the hallway he'd walked 1,000 times before, he noticed something small that didn't belong there. And instead of turning away, he stopped, because ignoring it suddenly felt like a mistake he couldn't afford to make. He noticed she was walking alone, and that's when the concern set in. No car waiting for her. No phone in her hand. No one nearby who would notice if something went wrong. She moved away from the house without urgency, without fear, as though this was something she had done many times before. That calm unsettled him more than panic ever could have. Most people would have looked away. He almost did. After all, she was just his housekeeper. Quiet, invisible, someone the world rarely paused to see. But something in his chest wouldn't let it go. No ride. No hesitation. Just 2 worn bags clutched tightly as she disappeared into the night. That was the moment he realized something didn't add up. So instead of turning back into the safety of his mansion, he made a decision he'd never made before. He followed her. Not out of suspicion. Not out of control. But because a question had taken root in his heart. Who is this woman after she leaves my house? What he discovered that night wouldn't just surprise him. It would quietly dismantle everything he believed about power, generosity, and what it truly means to matter. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Michael Harrison had never thought much about Rosa Martinez. For 3 years, she'd shown up to his home every Tuesday and Friday evening, cleaned his floors, organized his kitchen, folded his laundry with the kind of precision that suggested she cared about details most people missed. She never asked for anything extra, never complained, never made small talk that lingered too long. She was efficient, respectful, and nearly invisible. And in Michael's world, that was exactly what good help was supposed to be. He paid her well, or at least he thought he did. $200 a week in cash, handed over in a white envelope at the end of each month. He never asked where she lived or how she got home. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply the distance wealth creates between people who live in different worlds. But that distance was about to collapse in a way Michael never could have anticipated. That Tuesday night in late October, something shifted. Michael had been working late in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports for the tech startup he'd sold 2 years earlier for $40 million. The house was large, almost too large for one person. 7 bedrooms. A pool he never used. Marble countertops that gleamed under recessed lighting but rarely saw a home-cooked meal. He heard Rosa moving through the rooms as she always did. Methodical, unhurried. He didn't greet her. He rarely did. Around 11:15, he heard the soft click of the front door closing. That sound had always marked the end of her shift, the moment his home returned to silence. But this time, something made him stand up from his desk and walk to the window overlooking the driveway. That's when he saw her. Rosa was walking down the long gravel driveway toward the street, her back straight, her pace steady. No car idling at the curb. No headlights cutting through the darkness. Just her, alone. Moving into a neighborhood where streetlights were sparse, and the nearest bus stop was over 2 miles away. Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd never questioned how she got home before. He'd assumed someone picked her up, or maybe she had a car parked somewhere out of sight. But now, watching her silhouette shrink into the night, he realized how little he actually knew. How easy it had been to never ask. The question settled over him like a weight he couldn't ignore. Where is she going? And more than that, why had he never cared to know? He grabbed his keys without thinking. Threw on a jacket. Told himself he just wanted to make sure she was safe. That this was nothing more than basic human decency. But as he started his car and rolled slowly down the driveway with his headlights off, he knew it was more than that. Something about her calm disturbed him. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't rushing. She moved like someone who had done this walk 1,000 times, like someone who had long ago accepted that no one would notice or care. Michael kept his distance, trailing her from half a block back. She turned left onto Maple Grove Avenue, then right onto a narrow side street where the pavement cracked and weeds pushed through the edges. The houses here were smaller, older, with chain-link fences and peeling paint. This wasn't the neighborhood where people like Michael ventured after dark. This was the neighborhood where people like Rosa lived. The neighborhood that existed to serve his neighborhood but remained invisible to it. Rosa walked with steady determination, her 2 bags swinging slightly with each step. Michael followed, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. What was he doing? What right did he have to follow her like this? But he couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when every step she took revealed another layer of his own ignorance. Rosa walked for nearly 40 minutes. Michael followed the entire way, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every block. She passed convenience stores with barred windows, a laundromat that flickered with fluorescent light, a corner where 3 men stood smoking and watched her pass without a word. She didn't flinch, didn't look back, didn't pull out her phone or quicken her pace. She simply walked like this was normal, like this was just another Tuesday night, like danger was something she'd learned to live with because she had no other choice. Finally, she turned into a driveway in front of a small bungalow with a sagging porch and a front yard overgrown with wild grass. The house looked tired, like it had been holding its breath for years. Paint peeled from the wooden siding. One of the porch steps was cracked down the middle. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, rusted and bent in places where it had been climbed or pushed. Michael pulled over across the street and watched as Rosa climbed the steps carefully, testing each one before putting her full weight on it. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. A single dim light turned on in the front window. He sat there for a long time, engine idling, staring at that house. And for the first time in years, Michael Harrison felt ashamed. Not the shallow shame of making a social mistake or saying something awkward at a party, but the deep, soul-crushing shame of realizing you've been blind to something that mattered. That house, with its sagging porch and overgrown yard, was where Rosa went after cleaning his 7-bedroom mansion. That 40-minute walk in the dark was how she got home every Tuesday and Friday. And he had never once offered her a ride. Never once asked if she needed help. The next morning, Michael couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. He poured himself coffee and stood in his pristine kitchen, surrounded by marble and stainless steel, and realized how disconnected he'd become from the lives of people who made his comfort possible. Rosa had walked home alone, in the dark, through neighborhoods he would never set foot in, after scrubbing his floors and folding his clothes. And he had never once offered her a ride, never asked if she needed help, never thought beyond the transaction. He told himself he'd fix it. That Friday, when she came back, he'd offer to drive her home, maybe even give her a raise, something to ease the guilt that had lodged itself in his chest like a stone. But Friday came and Rosa didn't show up. Michael checked his phone. No missed calls, no text. He waited an hour, then 2. By 8 o'clock, he realized she wasn't coming, and the guilt turned into worry. He told himself maybe she was sick, maybe something came up, but deep down, he felt a gnawing concern he couldn't explain. That night, he drove back to the house he'd followed her to. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door cracked open, and a young man in his early 20s peered out. His eyes were tired, wary. There was a resemblance to Rosa in his features, the same dark eyes, the same shape to his face. "Can I help you?" he asked. Michael hesitated. "I'm looking for Rosa Martinez. She works for me. I just wanted to make sure she's okay." The young man's expression shifted, something between surprise and suspicion. "She's not here," he said quietly. "She's at the hospital." Michael's stomach dropped. What happened? The young man studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether the stranger deserved the truth. Then he sighed and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "She collapsed at her other job," he said. "They think it's exhaustion, maybe malnutrition. They're still running tests." Michael felt the air leave his lungs. "Her other job?" The young man nodded slowly. "She works 3 jobs. Cleans houses during the day, works at a nursing home in the evenings, then picks up overnight shifts at a warehouse on weekends. Michael just stood there, speechless. 3 jobs. And his was just one of them. The young man continued, his voice flat with exhaustion. She's been doing it for 5 years. Ever since my dad died. She's raising me and my little sister on her own. We're barely keeping the lights on. Michael's mouth went dry. He thought of the white envelope he handed her every month. $200. He'd thought it was generous. He'd calculated it once, decided it was fair for 6 hours of work a week. But now, standing on this cracked porch in front of a house that was one missed payment away from falling apart, he understood how little it actually meant. How little he had actually seen. The young man looked at him with something close to pity. If you want to help, you can visit her. She's at Mercy General. Room 214. Then he turned and went back inside, closing the door softly but firmly. Michael stood there for a moment, staring at that closed door, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Everything he thought he understood about fairness, about generosity, about being a good person suddenly felt hollow. He'd been living in a dream. A comfortable, insulated dream where he got to believe he treated people well because he paid them what he thought they were worth. But he'd never asked what they actually needed. Never wondered what it cost them to make his life comfortable. Never looked beyond the transaction to see the person standing in front of him. Michael drove to the hospital that night, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't organize into anything coherent. He walked through the sterile hallways, past patients and families, past nurses moving with practiced efficiency, until he found room 214. The door was halfway open. He knocked softly. A voice from inside said, "Come in." Michael stepped through the doorway, and there she was. Rosa was lying in bed, and 4 taped to her arm, her eyes closed. She looked smaller than he remembered. Fragile. The hospital gown swallowed her frame, and he could see how thin she was, how exhaustion had carved lines into her face that he'd never noticed before. He stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say, unsure if he even had the right to be there. After a moment, her eyes opened. She saw him and tried to sit up, alarm crossing her face. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I'll be back to work next week. I just need a few days." Even now, even lying in a hospital bed after collapsing from exhaustion, her first thought was apologizing to him. Michael shook his head and stepped inside, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Rosa, please, don't apologize." He sat down heavily. "I came to apologize to you." She looked confused. "For what?" He exhaled slowly, trying to find the right words. "For never asking. For never seeing. For treating you like you were invisible." His voice cracked. "You've been working yourself to death, and I didn't even notice." Rosa's eyes softened. "You paid me," she said gently. "You were always kind. You never asked me to do things that weren't part of the job. That's more than a lot of people can say." Michael shook his head. "That's not enough. Kindness isn't just being polite. It's paying attention. It's caring about what happens after you close the door." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. But this time it wasn't $200. It was a check for $20,000. Rosa stared at it, her hands beginning to tremble. "I can't take this," she whispered. Michael leaned forward. "Yes, you can. And you will. Because you've earned it 100 times over." Tears filled her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Michael smiled sadly. "Because I followed you home last Tuesday night." Rosa's eyes widened. "You what?" He nodded. "I saw you walking, and I got worried. So I followed you. I watched you walk for 40 minutes. I saw where you live." He paused. "And then I followed you again on Thursday night." Rosa's expression shifted to confusion and something that might have been fear. "You followed me twice?" Michael nodded again. "I did. And Rosa, what I saw changed everything." He took a breath. "I saw you walk to that old building. The one with the rusted gate and the faded sign. House of Second Chances." Rosa's face went pale. "You saw that?" Michael's voice was gentle now. "I saw you teaching. Saw you standing at the front of that room helping people learn English." He leaned forward. "I saw you give away your dinner, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for you." Rosa looked away, embarrassed. They needed it more than I did. Michael felt his throat tighten. Rosa, you collapsed from malnutrition. You needed it too. She shook her head. Some of those people haven't eaten all day. Some of them are living in shelters. One woman is sleeping in her car with her 2 kids. I can wait. They can't. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. I can wait. They can't. She was starving herself so other people could eat. Working 70 hours a week so her kids could have a future. Teaching English for free so strangers could have dignity. And she didn't see it as extraordinary. She saw it as necessary, as obvious, as the only choice a decent person could make. Michael sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. Tell me about the program, about House of Second Chances. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she began to speak, her voice soft but steady. My father couldn't read, she said. He came to this country when he was 19, worked construction for 30 years. He was strong, reliable, never missed a day. He sent me and my brother to school, paid for everything we needed, but he never learned to read. Not in Spanish. Not in English. Her voice wavered. When my mother got sick, the doctors gave him paperwork. Insurance forms, consent forms, instructions for her medication, and he couldn't read any of it. He was too ashamed to ask for help, too proud to admit he didn't understand. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. So he signed things he didn't understand, agreed to treatments he didn't know about, and when my mother's condition got worse, he didn't know how to advocate for her, didn't know how to ask the right questions, didn't know how to fight. Michael's chest tightened. What happened? Rosa wiped her eyes. She died 3 weeks later, and my father blamed himself for the rest of his life. He believed if he could read, if he could understand, he could have saved her. Her voice broke. He died 2 years after she did. Heart attack. But I think it was really a broken heart. Michael sat in silence, absorbing the weight of her words. Finally, he spoke. So you started teaching? Rosa nodded. 5 years ago, after my husband died and money got tight, I started working more jobs. One of them was at a community center that had an ESL program, English as a second language. But the funding got cut and they had to close it. All these people were suddenly left with nowhere to go. People who needed to learn English to get better jobs, to help their kids with homework, to understand their bills and their rights. So I found that old building, talked the owner into letting me use it twice a week. And I started teaching again. By yourself? Michael asked. Rosa nodded. I couldn't pay anyone else. And most people with teaching credentials weren't willing to work for free in that neighborhood. She smiled sadly. But the students kept coming. Word spread. People told their friends, their coworkers, their neighbors. Within 6 months, I had 20 regular students. Now I have almost 40. Michael shook his head in amazement. How do you do it? 3 jobs, 2 kids, and teaching for free twice a week. Rosa looked at him seriously. Because I remember what it felt like when my father couldn't fill out those forms. When he had to pretend he understood things he didn't. When people treated him like he was stupid because he couldn't read. I remember how small he looked. How ashamed. She paused. I teach because I don't want anyone else to feel that way. Because everyone deserves to be understood. To understand. To have a voice that matters. Michael felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about Rosa being a saint. This was about dignity. About refusing to accept that some people matter and some people don't. About building something quietly and without recognition, because it needed to exist. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Over the next 3 days, Michael couldn't stop thinking about what Rosa had told him. He'd spent his entire adult life in the world of business, where everything was measured in metrics and returns on investment. Success meant growth. Efficiency meant cutting costs. Value meant maximizing profit. But Rosa had built something that couldn't be measured that way. She'd built something that mattered not because it made money, but because it gave people dignity. Because it recognized their humanity. because it said, "You are worth teaching, worth seeing, worth investing in, even if you can never pay me back." Michael realized he'd spent years congratulating himself for being a good person while never actually doing anything good. He donated to charities, sure. Wrote checks at the end of the year for tax purposes. But he'd never sacrificed anything real. Never given up comfort or time or convenience. Never looked at someone who served him and asked, "What do you need? What are you carrying? How can I help?" On Thursday morning, Michael made a decision. He called his lawyer, his accountant, and his financial advisor. By the end of the day, he'd set several things in motion. First, he paid off Rosa's mortgage. The house with the sagging porch and overgrown yard was now hers, free and clear. Second, he set up college funds for both her children. Daniel would be able to attend any state university without worrying about tuition. Sophia would have the same opportunity when her time came. Third, he established a trust that would provide Rosa with a guaranteed income for the next 10 years, enough that she could quit at least 2 of her 3 jobs. And fourth, he created a non-profit foundation dedicated to funding adult education programs in underserved communities. But he knew these gestures, as significant as they were financially, didn't address the deeper problem. Money could solve immediate crises. It could relieve pressure and create opportunities. But it couldn't undo years of systemic inequality. It couldn't change the fact that people like Rosa had to work 3 jobs just to survive while people like Michael accumulated wealth they'd never be able to spend. It couldn't fix a world where the most important work, teaching, caregiving, building community, was valued less than the ability to manipulate financial markets or sell apps. Still, it was something. And it was a start. When Rosa was released from the hospital on Monday, Michael was there. He'd arranged for a car service to take her home, but he wanted to speak with her first. They sat in the hospital cafe, both holding cups of coffee neither of them drank. "I have something to tell you," Michael said. Rosa looked at him warily. "Okay." He took a breath. "I've paid off your mortgage, set up college funds for Daniel and Sophia, and created a trust that will pay you $5,000 a month for the next 10 years. Rosa's face went blank. She stared at him, not speaking, not moving. Finally, she said, "Why would you do that?" Michael met her eyes. "Because you shouldn't have to choose between feeding yourself and teaching people. Because your children deserve the same opportunities rich kids get. Because the work you do matters more than anything I've ever done. And it's grotesque that I live in comfort while you work yourself to death." Rosa shook her head slowly. "I can't accept this. It's too much." Michael leaned forward. "Rosa, you've been working 70 hours a week for 5 years. You've raised 2 kids alone. You've taught hundreds of people for free. You've given everything you have to everyone around you. When is someone going to give something to you?" Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks. "I don't know how to accept this. I don't know what to say." Michael smiled gently. "Say you'll keep teaching. Say you'll take care of yourself. Say you'll let someone help you for once." Rosa was quiet for a long time. Then finally she nodded. "Okay." Over the next few months, Michael watched Rosa's life transform. She quit her job at the nursing home and the overnight warehouse shifts. She started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. Her children noticed the change immediately. Daniel told Michael one afternoon that his mom had smiled at breakfast. Really smiled. Not the tired, forced smile she'd worn for years, but something genuine. Something that looked like hope. Sophia joined the soccer team again. She came home from practice glowing, talking about games and teammates and colleges that were starting to scout her. Daniel enrolled in community college with plans to transfer to a 4-year university. He wanted to be an engineer to build things that helped people. The house with the sagging porch got repairs. Michael hired contractors to fix the steps, paint the exterior, and tend to the yard. Rosa protested at first, but Michael insisted. "You've spent 5 years taking care of everyone else," he said. "Let someone take care of your home." But even with these changes, Rosa continued teaching at House of Second Chances. Twice a week, she still showed up to that rundown building with the rusted gate and taught English to people who had nowhere else to go. One evening, Michael asked if he could come with her. Rosa hesitated. "Why?" Michael shrugged. Because I want to understand. I want to see what you've built. She studied him for a long moment. If you come, you can't just watch. You have to help. Michael agreed. That Tuesday evening, he followed Rosa through the rusted gate and into the small building. Inside, it was even more worn than he'd realized from looking through the window. The ceiling had water stains spreading like bruises across yellowed tiles. The floor was cracked linoleum, some pieces missing entirely to reveal concrete underneath. The chairs were mismatched, metal folding chairs, plastic patio chairs, even a few wooden chairs that looked like they'd been rescued from a curb on trash day. Some had broken legs propped up with folded cardboard. But the people who filled those chairs looked at Rosa like she was the most important person in the world. Michael helped set up. He arranged chairs in rows, passed out workbooks that were falling apart from use, their pages held together with tape and staples. He erased the whiteboard and filled water cups from a small sink in the corner. And then he sat in the back and watched Rosa teach. She started with basic phrases. How to introduce yourself. How to ask for help. How to say you don't understand. Simple things that Michael had taken for granted his entire life. Things he'd learned as a child without thinking about them. But for the people in that room, these were survival skills. The difference between getting a job and staying unemployed. Between defending yourself and being taken advantage of. Between existing and being invisible. Rosa moved through the room with patience and kindness. She repeated phrases over and over without frustration. She demonstrated pronunciation carefully. She corrected gently. She praised every small success. Michael watched a woman in her 50s struggle to say, "I need help, please." Her accent was thick, her uncertainty visible in every word. But Rosa worked with her, breaking the phrase into smaller pieces, showing her where to place her tongue, how to shape the sounds. After 10 minutes, the woman said it clearly. "I need help, please." The room erupted in applause. The woman's face lit up with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. And Michael understood something profound. This wasn't just about language. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. It was about matching. Halfway through the class, an older man raised his hand. He spoke in halting English, his accent thick, his words careful. "Miss Rosa, why you do this? Why you help us?" The room went quiet. Rosa paused. She set down the chalk and sat on the edge of the desk. "My father couldn't read," she said quietly. The room remained still. Michael leaned forward. "He came to this country when he was 19, Rosa continued. "Worked construction for 30 years. Sent me and my brother to school. Paid for everything we needed. But he never learned to read. Not in Spanish. Not in English." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "When my mother got sick, the doctors gave him paperwork. Insurance forms. Consent forms. Instructions for her medication. And he couldn't read any of it. He was too ashamed to ask for help. Too proud to admit he didn't understand. Tears welled in her eyes. So he signed things he didn't understand. Agreed to treatments he didn't know about. And when my mother's condition got worse, he didn't know how to advocate for her. Didn't know how to ask the right questions. Didn't know how to fight. The room was completely silent now. Some of the students were crying. Others sat frozen, recognizing their own fears in Rosa's story. "She died 3 weeks later," Rosa said, her voice breaking. "And my father blamed himself for the rest of his life. He believed if he could read, if he could understand, he could have saved her." She wiped her eyes. "So I teach, because I don't want anyone else to lose someone they love because they couldn't fill out a form, because they couldn't ask for help, because the world made them feel invisible." The older man who'd asked the question stood up slowly. He walked to the front of the room and hugged Rosa. Others followed. One by one, people stood and embraced her. Some were crying. Others whispered thank you in Spanish, in broken English, in languages Michael didn't recognize. And Michael sat in the back, watching, feeling something crack open inside him that had been sealed for years. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about Rosa being a good person or a saint or some inspiring story. This was about dignity. About refusing to accept that some people matter and some people don't. about building something quietly and without recognition, because it needed to exist. Because the alternative was letting people suffer in silence. When the class ended, people lingered. They gathered their worn notebooks and thanked Rosa again. Some asked questions about the next lesson. Others told her about small victories. A job interview scheduled. A conversation with a neighbor that went well. A form filled out correctly. Rosa listened to each person with complete attention, celebrating every success like it was her own. Michael helped clean up. They worked in silence for a while, stacking chairs, erasing the board, sweeping the floor. Finally, Michael spoke. "Rosa, I want to help. I want to fund this program, get you a better space, hire more teachers, provide materials, whatever you need." Rosa stopped. She set down the chair she was holding and turned to face him. "Why?" Michael met her gaze. "Because what you're doing matters. Because it shouldn't depend on you working yourself to death. Because people deserve more than scraps." Rosa was quiet for a long time. Then she sat down and gestured for Michael to do the same. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "I really do. But I need to know something first." Michael nodded. "Anything." Rosa looked at him seriously. "Are you doing this because you feel guilty? Or because you actually believe people like me and the people in this room deserve better?" Michael felt the weight of the question. He thought about his answer. Really thought about it. Then he spoke. "Both," he said honestly. "I do feel guilty. I've lived my whole life in comfort while people like you did the work that made that comfort possible. And I never questioned it. Never thought about what it cost you. So yes, I feel guilty." He paused. "But more than that, I'm angry. I'm angry that the world is set up this way. That people who work harder than I ever have can barely survive. That someone like you, who gives everything to everyone, has to choose between eating and teaching. That's not just unfair. It's wrong. And I can't unsee it now," Michael continued. "I can't go back to believing that paying you $200 a week made me a good person. I can't go back to thinking that because I'm polite and I don't actively harm anyone, I'm doing enough. Because I'm not. None of us are. And if I have resources that can help, and I choose not to use them, then I'm part of the problem." Rosa studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "If I let you help, I need to be clear about something. I don't want to be saved. I don't want this to be your charity project that makes you feel good. I want this to be a partnership. I want my voice to matter. I want the people in this room to have a say in how things are run." Michael nodded immediately. "Absolutely. You built this. You know what it needs. I'm just here to provide resources." Rosa considered this. "And you're not going to try to change what we do? Make it more efficient or profitable or whatever business people do?" Michael shook his head. "This isn't a business. This is a community. And the only people who know how to serve this community are the people in it. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to support what you've already built." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, but we do this right. We don't just throw money at it. We build something that lasts. Something that respects the people it serves." Michael extended his hand. "Deal." Rosa shook it. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't about Michael rescuing Rosa. This wasn't about a wealthy man swooping in to fix poverty with a checkbook. This was about two people recognizing that the world was broken and deciding to build something better. Together. With respect. With intention. With the understanding that dignity can't be given. Can only be recognized. And that recognition, that simple act of seeing someone fully, was the most revolutionary thing either of them had ever done. Over the next 6 months, Michael kept his promise. He didn't take over. He didn't impose his vision. He listened. Rosa told him what the program needed, and he made it happen. But he made sure to involve her in every decision. They met weekly to discuss the program's development. They found a new space, a renovated community center with proper lighting, working heat, and enough room for 50 students. The building had classrooms that didn't leak when it rained, bathrooms that actually worked, and a small kitchen where students could make coffee or heat up food. Michael hired contractors to paint it in warm, welcoming colors. They installed new furniture, computers for students to practice typing and English skills, and a small library of ESL materials. But Rosa insisted on keeping some things from the old building. The whiteboard she'd used for years, the sign from above the door, some of the chairs that students had sat in when they first started learning. People need to know this is still their space, she explained. Not something fancy that doesn't belong to them. They hired 3 more teachers, all of them immigrants who understood what it meant to navigate a country that didn't want to see you. Maria, who'd come from Guatemala and learned English while working night shifts at a hotel. Khalil, who'd arrived from Somalia as a refugee and now had a master's degree in education. And Lynn, who'd immigrated from China and still remembered the isolation of not being able to communicate. Together, they created a teaching team that understood their students not as charity cases, but as people with skills, knowledge, and dignity who just needed help with one specific thing: English. They partnered with local organizations to provide childcare during classes so parents could attend. They offered job placement assistance, connecting students with employers who valued bilingual workers. They provided legal aid referrals for immigration questions. They gave out English proficiency certificates that employers actually recognized. And they did it all while keeping Rosa at the center. Her vision, her leadership, her voice. Michael stepped back and watched what happened when you gave people resources without taking away their power. The program grew rapidly. Within 3 months of opening the new center, they had a waiting list of over 200 people. Word spread through communities that had been ignored for decades. People came from across the city, taking 2 buses or walking for miles, because finally there was a place that saw them. A place that said, "You matter, and we will help you." Michael funded scholarships for students who wanted to continue their education. He hired more staff. He opened a 2nd location across town, then a 3rd. But the most important thing he did was show up. Not as a benefactor, not as someone who wanted credit, but as someone who wanted to learn. He attended classes twice a week, not to observe but to help. He practiced conversation with students. He helped with administrative work. He listened to people talk about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. A man named Javier told him about working 3 landscaping jobs and sending money back to his mother in El Salvador. Money that paid for his younger siblings' education. A woman named Luz shared how she cleaned office buildings at night and was raising her grandson alone because her daughter had been deported after a traffic stop. A younger man named Carlos explained that he'd been in the country for 6 years and still couldn't read a menu or fill out a job application because no one had ever taught him how, and he was too ashamed to ask. Every single one of them talked about Rosa like she'd saved their life. Not in a dramatic, hyperbolic way, but in the quiet, factual way people talk about doctors who cured their illness or firefighters who pulled them from a burning building. She taught me to read. She helped me pass my driving test. She wrote a letter to my landlord when he tried to evict me illegally. She stayed with my kids when I had to work a double shift and couldn't find childcare. She gave me her jacket when mine got stolen and I didn't have money for another one. Small things, practical things. Things that didn't cost much money but required something more valuable. Time, tension, the willingness to see someone else's suffering and do something about it. And Rosa did it without recognition, without praise, without expecting anything in return. She did it because it needed to be done, because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, because she couldn't live comfortably while others suffered if she had the power to do something about it. Michael sat in that community center and listened to these stories, and with every word, the distance between his world and theirs shrank. These weren't statistics. They weren't policy debates. They weren't problems to be solved with algorithms or market solutions. They were people. People who worked harder than he ever had. People who contributed more to the world than he ever would. People who deserved better than what they were getting. And Rosa was holding them together with her own strength, her own sacrifice, her own refusal to accept that some lives matter less than others. One evening after class, Michael and Rosa sat in the empty community center, exhausted but satisfied. The day had been long but productive. They'd helped 30 students, celebrated 5 people who'd passed their citizenship tests, and connected 2 students with jobs that paid living wages. Rosa looked at Michael. "You've changed," she said. Michael smiled. "So have you." Rosa shook her head. "I'm the same person I've always been. You just see me now." Michael nodded slowly. "You're right. And that's the problem, isn't it? How many people are out there, doing extraordinary things, and no one sees them because we've been taught not to look." Rosa leaned back in her chair. "Most people don't want to see, because if they did, they'd have to change. And change is uncomfortable." Michael thought about that, about how easy it had been to live in his mansion, to pay Rosa $200 a week, to believe he was a good person because he wasn't actively cruel. How willful that ignorance had been. How comfortable. How convenient. "I don't want to go back to not seeing," he said quietly. Rosa smiled. "Then don't. Keep showing up. Keep listening. Keep building. That's all any of us can do." They sat in silence for a while, and Michael realized something profound. This wasn't a story about redemption. This wasn't about him becoming a hero. This was about recognition. About finally understanding that the most important people in the world are often the ones no one notices. The ones who clean floors, teach for free, walk 2 miles home in the dark, and give away their dinner because someone else needs it more. The ones who hold communities together while the wealthy and powerful take credit for progress they had nothing to do with. Over the next year, the Second Chances Learning Center became a model for adult education programs across the state. Other organizations reached out asking how they'd done it, how they'd grown so quickly, how they'd created such strong community support. And every time, Rosa gave the same answer. "We listened. We respected people. We treated education not as charity but as a right." Michael watched her give these presentations, speak at conferences, receive recognition from city officials and education advocates. And he stayed in the background. This was her accomplishment, her vision. He'd simply provided resources. But even that felt important, because he'd learned something crucial. That wealth isn't just about having money. It's about choosing what to do with it. You can hoard it, use it to accumulate more, build walls that separate you from people who have less. Or you can use it to remove obstacles, to create opportunities, to recognize that your comfort comes at a cost others pay. And maybe, just maybe, you have a responsibility to do something about that. Michael also changed how he lived. He sold his 7-bedroom mansion and moved into a smaller home. Still comfortable, still nice, but not grotesquely large. He donated the difference to the Learning Center and other community organizations. He started paying attention to everyone whose labor made his life possible. The landscaper who mowed his new, smaller lawn. The woman who delivered his mail. The teenager who bagged his groceries at the supermarket. He learned their names, asked about their lives, offered help when he could. Not as charity, not as someone trying to feel good about himself, but as someone who'd finally learned that every person carries a story. And some stories, if you're willing to listen, will change you forever. He also started advocating publicly for policy changes. Higher minimum wages, universal health care, affordable housing, better funding for public education. He used his wealth and his platform not to congratulate himself for being generous, but to argue that the system itself was broken. That individual charity, while important, could never fix structural inequality. That real change required laws that valued people's labor, that guaranteed basic dignity, that didn't force anyone to work 70 hours a week just to survive. Some of his wealthy friends criticized him, called him a traitor to his class, said he'd gone soft. But Michael didn't care, because he'd seen what they refused to see. He'd followed Rosa into the night and discovered a world they pretended didn't exist. Rosa's son Daniel graduated from community college with honors and transferred to the state university to study engineering. He wanted to design infrastructure for underserved communities. Water systems, electrical grids, things that would improve lives in places that had been neglected for generations. Sophia, Rosa's daughter, became captain of her soccer team and received scholarship offers from 3 colleges. She wanted to study education, wanted to teach like her mother, wanted to help people who felt invisible find their voice. And Rosa herself became the director of the Second Chances Learning Center network. She oversaw 5 locations across the city, employed 23 teachers, and served over 800 students every year. She still taught twice a week, still sat with students who struggled, still gave away her lunch to people who needed it more, though now Michael made sure she had enough that giving didn't mean going without. One afternoon, almost 3 years after that October night when Michael first followed Rosa home, they sat together in the main learning center. The building hummed with activity. Students practiced English in small groups. Teachers moved between tables offering help. Someone laughed. Someone else asked a question. The sounds of learning, of people claiming space in a language that had once excluded them, filled the air. Rosa looked at Michael. "Do you remember that first night? When you followed me?" Michael nodded. "I think about it all the time." "What do you think about?" she asked. Michael considered the question. "I think about how close I came to never knowing, to spending my whole life believing I was a good person while you walked home in the dark, to never understanding that the world I lived in was built on the suffering of people I never bothered to see." He paused. "And I think about how many other people are out there right now, living like I did, comfortable, insulated, convinced they're good because they're not actively cruel, never realizing they're complicit in systems that destroy people like you." Rosa nodded slowly. "That's why we do this work. Not just to teach English, but to make people visible, to force people to see." "Do you think it's working?" Michael asked. Rosa smiled. "Look around. 800 students, 23 teachers, 5 locations. People who couldn't read 3 years ago are now helping their kids with homework. People who were afraid to speak are now advocating for themselves at work. People who felt invisible are building lives they're proud of." She paused. "It's working, but it's not enough. It will never be enough until everyone has what they need to live with dignity." Michael agreed. "So we keep going." "We keep going," Rosa confirmed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the center they'd built together. And Michael thought about that night 3 years ago. Thought about Rosa walking into the darkness, 2 worn bags in her hands, moving with the quiet certainty of someone who'd accepted that no one would notice or care. He thought about how easy it would have been to look away, to close the door, to go to bed believing everything was fine. But he'd made a different choice. He'd followed her, and that choice had changed everything. Not just for Rosa, not just for her children or her students, but for him. Because once you see someone fully, once you recognize their humanity as equal to your own, you can't go back to pretending they don't matter. You can't go back to comfort that depends on their suffering. You can't go back to sleep. 3 years after that night, Michael stood outside the original House of Second Chances building. It had been closed for 2 years now, replaced by the larger, better-equipped community center. But the building still stood, with its rusted gate and faded sign. The city wanted to demolish it, make way for new development, but Michael and Rosa had bought it, turned it into a memorial of sorts, a reminder of what Rosa had built with nothing but determination and love. A reminder that the most powerful transformations often start in forgotten places, with forgotten people. In moments no one witnesses, they'd placed a plaque outside the building. It read, "In this place, Rosa Martinez taught dignity. She reminded us that every person deserves to be seen, to be heard, to matter. She built something beautiful from nothing because it needed to exist. May we all have the courage to see what needs building and the humility to let others lead the way." Michael read those words and thought about everything that had changed. Not just in Rosa's life or in the lives of her students, but in him. He'd been wealthy before. He was still wealthy. But now he understood that wealth without responsibility was just hoarding. That comfort without awareness was just indifference. That being a good person required more than not being bad. It required seeing. It required caring. It required action. That night, Michael drove home to his smaller house. He thought about Rosa, probably at home with her children, finally able to relax. Finally able to sleep without fear that one missed paycheck would destroy everything. Finally able to just be, without carrying the weight of survival on her shoulders every single moment. He thought about the students who'd learned to read, to speak, to advocate for themselves. He thought about the teachers who'd found purpose helping people who needed them. He thought about the community that had formed around a simple idea, that everyone deserves dignity. And he thought about the version of himself who'd handed Rosa a white envelope every month and believed that was enough. That version felt like a stranger now, someone he'd barely recognized, someone he was glad he no longer was. But he also knew he wasn't done changing. This wasn't a destination. It was a direction, a commitment to keep seeing, keep listening, keep building, keep recognizing that the world was full of people like Rosa, doing extraordinary things in ordinary places, holding communities together while remaining invisible to those with power and wealth. Michael's phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. Daniel got accepted to his top choice engineering program. Full scholarship. Thank you for everything. Michael smiled and typed back. That's all him. And you. Congratulations. But he knew that wasn't entirely true. Yes, Daniel had worked hard. Yes, Rosa had sacrificed everything. But Michael's help had removed obstacles that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Had created opportunities that should have been available to everyone. Had recognized that talent and intelligence and determination aren't distributed based on wealth. They're distributed randomly. And the only difference between a kid who becomes an engineer and a kid who never gets the chance is access. Resources. Someone willing to see them and say, you matter, and I will help. That was the real lesson. Not that Michael was a hero for helping, but that the world was full of people who deserved help and never received it. People who worked themselves to death because no one noticed. People who had gifts to give but never got the chance. People who built beautiful things in the shadows while others took credit in the light. How many Rosa Martinezes were out there right now, walking home in the dark, teaching in broken buildings, giving everything they had to people who couldn't give anything back? How many were collapsing from exhaustion because the world extracted their labor and gave nothing in return? How many were one missed paycheck away from losing everything? And how many wealthy, comfortable people were choosing not to see them? Choosing comfort over awareness. Choosing indifference over action. Choosing to believe that paying someone what the market says they're worth is the same as treating them with dignity. Michael couldn't answer those questions. But he could make a different choice. Every single day. He could see. He could listen. He could act. He could use his resources not to accumulate more, but to remove obstacles. He could recognize that his comfort came at a cost others paid. And he could decide that cost was too high. That was the transformation. Not becoming a better person, but becoming a person who refused to look away. Several months later, Michael attended the graduation ceremony at the Second Chances Learning Center. 50 students were completing the advanced English program and receiving certificates that would help them get better jobs, apply to schools, advocate for their families. The ceremony was held in the main center, the large room packed with students, families, teachers, and community members. Children ran around excitedly. Grandparents wiped tears from their eyes. The air hummed with pride and hope. Rosa stood at the front, reading each name as students walked across the small stage to receive their certificates. Michael sat in the back, watching. One by one, students crossed that stage. Each one had a story. Javier, who could now read contracts and protect himself from employers who tried to cheat him. Luz, who'd passed her citizenship test and brought her grandson to celebrate. Carlos, who'd gotten promoted at work because he could finally communicate clearly with customers and supervisors. Maria, who'd started taking community college classes. Ahmed, who'd opened a small business. Lynn, who'd become a teaching assistant at the center, helping newer students the way others had helped her. As each person received their certificate, the room erupted in applause. And Michael understood something profound. This wasn't just about English. This was about power. The power to be understood. The power to understand. The power to navigate systems designed to exclude you. The power to demand better treatment. The power to imagine a different future and have the tools to build it. Rosa had given them that power. Not because she was wealthy. Not because it was easy. But because she refused to accept that some people matter and some people don't. because she remembered what it felt like to be powerless, because she couldn't live with herself if she had the ability to help and chose not to. When the last certificate was handed out, Rosa stepped to the microphone. 3 years ago, she said, her voice carrying through the room, we had 20 students and 1 teacher. We met in a building with a leaking roof and broken chairs. We had almost no materials, no funding, no support. She paused. But we had something more important. We had each other. We had determination. We had the belief that everyone deserves dignity, that everyone deserves to be seen. The room was silent, hanging on her words. Today we have 5 centers, 800 students, 23 teachers, partnerships with employers, schools, and community organizations. We have resources and recognition. She looked around the room. But none of that matters as much as this. We still have each other. We still have determination. We still believe that everyone deserves dignity. She smiled. And we're just getting started. The room erupted in applause. People stood. Some were crying. Others were cheering. And Michael sat in the back, his own eyes wet, watching Rosa receive the recognition she'd always deserved. After the ceremony, people gathered for food and celebration. Michael helped set up tables, served coffee, congratulated graduates. He moved through the crowd, not as a benefactor but as part of the community, as someone who belonged because he'd shown up, because he'd listened, because he'd recognized that helping isn't about credit. It's about creating space for others to thrive. Late in the evening, as people began to leave, Rosa found Michael. "Thank you for coming," she said. Michael shook his head. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Rosa smiled. "You know, I've been thinking about that night. The night you followed me. What about it?" Rosa looked at him seriously. "I was angry at first. When you told me, it felt like an invasion of privacy." Michael nodded. "It was. I'm sorry." Rosa held up a hand. "Let me finish. I was angry, but then I realized something. You could have looked away. Most people would have. Most people do every single day. But you didn't. You saw me walking into the dark, and something in you said, 'That's not right. I need to do something.'" She paused. That moment of attention, that choice to see instead of ignore, that's what changed everything. Not the money, not the resources, but the fact that you finally saw me as a person whose life mattered as much as yours. Michael felt his throat tighten. "I should have seen you sooner." Rosa nodded. "Yes, you should have. But most people never see at all. So I'm grateful you saw when you did." She looked around the room, at the students laughing with their families, at the teachers packing up materials, at the community they'd built together. This is what's possible when people choose to see, when they choose to care, when they choose to act. Michael followed her gaze. "What's next?" Rosa smiled. "We keep going. We open more centers. We help more people. We build more partnerships. We advocate for policy changes that create real equity, not just charity." She turned back to him. "And we remind people that the most revolutionary thing you can do in this world is to see someone the world has taught you to ignore." Michael nodded. "I'm in. For as long as you'll have me." Rosa extended her hand. "Partners." Michael shook it firmly. "Partners." They stood together, watching the celebration continue around them. And Michael thought about everything that had changed since that October night 3 years ago. He thought about the person he'd been. Comfortable, insulated, blind to suffering he'd never had to experience. And he thought about the person he was becoming. Someone who saw, someone who listened, someone who understood that wealth without responsibility was just another form of poverty. Someone who recognized that the most important people in the world were often the ones no one noticed. And he thought about Rosa, about her walking into the night with 2 worn bags, about her teaching in a broken building, about her giving away her dinner, about her refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others, about her building something beautiful because it needed to exist. She was the hero of this story, not him. She always had been. He'd just finally learned to see it. "Before we go, we want to hear from you." What would you do if you were in Michael's position? Would you have followed Rosa that night? Would you have helped? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people around you, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that remind us what really matters in this world. Because the truth is, we all have the power to see. We all have the power to care. We all have the power to make someone's life a little bit easier, a little bit better, a little bit more dignified. The only question is, will we choose to use that power? Or will we look away? 3 years after that October night when Michael Harrison followed his housekeeper into the darkness, he sat in his home office and thought about everything that had changed. The walls around him were covered not with awards or accolades, but with photographs. Pictures of students at the Learning Center. Pictures of graduation ceremonies. Pictures of Rosa teaching, her hands moving expressively as she explained a concept. Pictures of Daniel at university. Pictures of Sophia on the soccer field. Pictures of a community that had formed around a simple idea. Everyone deserves dignity. His phone rang. It was Rosa. "Michael, I need to tell you something." Her voice sounded strange. Excited but also emotional. "What is it?" Michael asked. "The state education board just called. They want to replicate our model. They're allocating funding for 20 new centers across the state, all based on what we built." Michael felt his chest tighten. "Rosa, that's incredible. It gets better," she continued. "They want me to lead the initiative, to train new teachers, to help other communities build their own centers." She paused. "Michael, we're going to help thousands of people. Maybe tens of thousands." Michael smiled, tears forming in his eyes. "You're going to help tens of thousands of people. This is your vision. Your work." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "It's our work. You taught me something important. You taught me that transformation isn't just about one person helping another. It's about recognizing that we're all connected. That my liberation is tied to yours. That no one is truly free until everyone has dignity." Michael thought about that. About how much he'd learned from Rosa. About how following her into the night had been the beginning of his own liberation. Liberation from indifference. From the comfortable blindness wealth creates. From the lie that some people matter more than others. "When do you start?" he asked. Rosa laughed. "Next month. And I want you on the advisory board. Not as a donor, as a partner." Michael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'd be honored." After they hung up, Michael sat in silence for a long time. He thought about that October night. About seeing Rosa walk into the darkness. About making the choice to follow instead of looking away. That choice had cost him nothing and changed everything. It had cost him nothing because he'd had resources to spare. Money he'd never miss. Time he could afford to give. But it had changed everything because it had opened his eyes to a world he'd spent his life avoiding. A world where people worked themselves to death and still couldn't survive. Where children went hungry while billionaires bought yachts. Where the most important work, teaching, caregiving, building community, was valued less than the ability to manipulate financial markets. Where people like Rosa held society together while people like him took all the credit. He couldn't fix that world alone. No one could. But he could make different choices. Every single day. He could see people instead of ignoring them. He could listen instead of assuming. He could use his resources to remove obstacles instead of building bigger walls. He could recognize that his comfort came at a cost others paid, and that cost was too high. That was the real transformation. Not becoming a hero, but becoming someone who refused to look away. Someone who understood that the most powerful thing you can do in this world is to see someone the world has taught you to ignore. To recognize their humanity. To treat their struggles as if they matter as much as your own. Because they do. They always did. Michael just hadn't known it until he followed Rosa into the night and discovered what he'd been missing. He discovered that the woman who cleaned his floors was also a teacher who changed lives. That the person he'd treated as invisible was actually the most important person he'd ever met. That wealth without awareness was just another form of poverty. that the most valuable things in life, dignity, community, purpose, connection, couldn't be bought. They could only be built, together, with respect, with intention, with the understanding that we're all responsible for each other. And now, sitting in his office surrounded by pictures of the community they'd built, Michael understood something he'd spend the rest of his life trying to honor. The most powerful transformation isn't built with money. It's built the moment you finally choose to see someone, really see them, not as a role they play in your life, not as a function they perform, but as a person whose humanity is equal to your own, whose struggles matter just as much, whose dreams deserve the same chance to become real. That moment of seeing that simple act of attention had changed 2 lives, his and Rose's, but it had also changed hundreds of others. The students who learned to read, the families who found stability, the teachers who found purpose, the community that formed around the belief that everyone deserves dignity. And now it would change thousands more, because Rosa was taking what they'd built and spreading it across the state, because the model they'd created built on respect, partnership, and the recognition that people know what they need better than anyone else was being replicated. Because sometimes, when you choose to see, when you choose to care, when you choose to act, you start something that grows beyond anything you could have imagined. Michael stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about Rosa, probably at home with her children, planning for the new role that would let her help even more people. He thought about all the students who would walk through the doors of new learning centers across the state. He thought about all the lives that would change because someone had finally chosen to see them. And he thought about everyone watching this story right now. Everyone who'd followed along as he'd followed Rosa into the night. Everyone who'd felt something shift inside them as they recognized their own blindness, their own indifference, their own opportunities to see and care and act. Because that's why stories like this matter. Not because they make us feel good, but because they make us see. They remind us that we're all connected, that we all have the power to change someone's life, that the most revolutionary thing we can do is to pay attention to the people the world has taught us to ignore. So here's the question this story leaves you with. The question Michael had to answer 3 years ago. The question we all have to answer every single day. Will you see? Will you notice the person who cleans your office, who delivers your mail, who serves your coffee, who makes your life comfortable while struggling to survive? Will you ask their name, learn their story, recognize their humanity? Will you look at the systems that create your comfort and ask who pays the cost? Will you use whatever resources you have, time, money, attention, privilege, to remove obstacles instead of building walls? Or will you look away? Will you close the door, turn off the lights, and go to bed believing everything is fine? Will you tell yourself that you're a good person because you're not actively cruel, while ignoring the ways you benefit from systems that destroy others? The choice is yours. It always has been. Michael Harrison made his choice that October night. He chose to follow Rosa into the darkness. And that choice changed everything. Not just for them, but for hundreds of people whose lives were transformed because someone finally saw them. Now it's your turn. What will you choose? Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for staying until the end. If it moved you, if it changed something in how you see the world, please share it. Because stories like this have power. The power to open eyes, to soften hearts, to inspire action. The power to remind us that we're all responsible for each other. That dignity isn't something some people deserve and others don't. It's something every human being is entitled to simply by existing. And most importantly, the power to show us that transformation is possible, that we can change, that we can become people who see instead of ignore, who care instead of dismiss, who act instead of rationalize. Michael Harrison did it. Rosa Martinez did it. And so can you. The woman who walked into the night was never just a housekeeper. She was a teacher, a mother, community builder, a force who held people together when the world tried to tear them apart. And the man who followed her was never just a billionaire. He was someone who'd been asleep his whole life and finally woke up. Someone who'd been blind and finally saw. Someone who'd been comfortable and finally understood that comfort built on others' suffering isn't comfort at all. Their story isn't exceptional. It's a mirror, a reflection of all the times we've looked away when we could have seen. All the times we've walked past someone struggling when we could have helped. All the times we've chosen comfort over awareness, indifference over action, convenience over compassion. But it's also a promise. Promise that it's never too late to see, never too late to care, never too late to change, never too late to recognize that the most important people in the world are often the ones no one notices, and that seeing them, truly seeing them, is the most powerful thing we can do. So go forward from this story with open eyes. Look at the people around you. Really look. See them. Ask their names. Learn their stories. Recognize their humanity. And when you see suffering you have the power to ease, don't look away. Don't tell yourself it's not your responsibility. Don't rationalize why someone else should help. Choose to see. Choose to care. Choose to act. Because that's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but through small moments of attention, through choices to see instead of ignore, through recognition that we're all connected, and that every person's dignity is our collective responsibility. Michael Harrison learned that lesson by following Rosa Martinez into the night. Now you know it too. The only question left is, what will you do with that knowledge? Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for choosing to see. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your heart soft, and your hands ready to help. Because the world is full of people waiting to be seen. And you have the power to see them.